Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. In today's video we've got a couple of things to discuss, including a major signing by the Seattle Kraken, some arbitration updates, and a couple of trade rumors involving Karlsson and some goalie rumors. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now, as I was talking about, we have a lot of things to discuss today. We'll start with the signings. Surprisingly, there's only been one signing since we last talked on Thursday. It was a pretty big signing, but it's quite surprising that we've only had one. And the signing is as follows. The Seattle Kraken have came to terms with top defenseman Vince Dunn. Dunn was expected to be going to arbitration in the next couple of days, and they avoid that. So Dunn gets a 4-year contract extension with an AAV of $7.35 million, which is pretty good value in my opinion. I think that's a pretty good deal. Dunn has shown over the past little while he can be a solid player. Dunn was the Seattle Kraken's expansion pick from the St. Louis Blues. And at the time there was a little bit of surprise there because as much as Dunn was a pretty good player and most likely was going to be the pick by Seattle, there was a lot of people who thought that the Kraken would have gone the direction of Vladimir Tarasenko and taken him. But the Kraken wound up choosing Dunn. And in Dunn's first year, he did all right. He had 35 points, tying a career high. Definitely showed he can be a top 4 defenseman in Seattle with a little bit more ice time. This year, broke out over 60 points this year and really showed his offensive flair to his full potential this year. So I think it's really good. If Dunn can continue to put up between like 50 and 65 points year after year, I think this is going to be a pretty good deal for the Seattle Kraken and Vince Dunn. And looking back on it, after the expansion draft, Tarasenko had a really good season with St. Louis. He then had a pretty good season with St. Louis last year. Got injured a couple of times, was moved just before a deadline to the New York Rangers for a first, play, and a couple of other things. And now he's a free agent, and he's one of the big free agents who hasn't been able to get a contract yet. So I think in retrospect, it was really a great move for Seattle Kraken to get done. He's definitely done really well, and he's definitely broken out as a really good young defender, while Tarasenko's having a hard time getting an NHL contract with some of these other teams. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I really do like that deal for Dunn. That negates his arbitration case, so the Seattle Kraken will have a buyout window, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. But that's a really good deal in my opinion. $7.35 million is pretty good value for Dunn, and the Kraken now have their top defenseman locked up for the next couple of years. So that's the only thing I want to get to here today. Next, to go over to the arbitration cases. The two arbitration cases which you said could go did wind up happening over the past little while. The Chicago Blackhawks and Philip Kurashev did indeed go through to arbitration early on Thursday morning, while the Toronto Maple Leafs and Samsonov did go through to arbitration early Friday morning. So both those teams did go through arbitration. So once again, just a few things after arbitration. Once they go through the arbitration hearing, they have to accept the contract that's given by the arbitrator, unless that contract has an AAV of over $4.6 million. If it's over 4.6, the team can decide to walk away and let the player become a free agent. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's any that are that big that could wind up leaving a team walking away from his contract. So on top of that, Kurashev, we know that Kurashev was looking for a 1-year deal at around $2.6 million. We know that the Hawks were looking for a 2-year deal at around $1.4 million. I'd probably say the arbitrator will give a 2-year deal at around $2.1, $2.2 million. I mean, Kurashev was one of the bright spots of the Blackhawks last year, so it would not surprise me in the least if Kurashev was to get over $2 million. So don't be too shocked if that happens. As for Samsonov, I think it's quite likely we get something around a 1-year deal. Now, for Samsonov, because he's 26 years old, it has to be a 1-year deal. So that means that he'll be a UFA at the end of next year. But I would most likely say somewhere between like maybe $3.8 and $4.2 million on a 1-year deal for Samsonov. It's not overly expensive, but it's something that the Leafs are going to have to really find some trouble getting under their cap hit. So it's going to be interesting to see, but Samsonov, Kurashev, both wound up going to free agency, so that's going to be interesting to see what happens after that. Also, with those arbitration cases, the arbitrator will announce the contract usually around 48 hours after hearings. So Kurashev's was pretty early on Thursday, so I would expect we get some sort of announcement later today. I'm recording this in the early morning of Saturday, so we should probably get something on Kurashev on a contract by the time this hits YouTube, so we're definitely interested to see. On top of that, Samsonov at some point early, probably on Sunday, will also be getting a contract update on his arbitration hearing. So we'll definitely get these contracts over the next couple of days. It's just a matter of what sort of contract value they are. But definitely, I think we probably see something around 2.1, 2.2 million for 2 years for Kurashev, and around 1 year at some point between 3.8 and 4.2 million for Samsonov. So I think those would be pretty good value deals. But sometime later today, we'll see what Kurashev's contract was offered, and sometime later tomorrow, we'll see what Samsonov was offered. So going to be interesting to see. But those are two pretty big arbitration news that I think is really important. So once again, like I said, there's always a couple of arbitration cases that actually hit arbitration, and we've seen a couple happen already. So going to be interesting to see. Now, after Dunn signed yesterday, that means that we're not going to have any more arbitration hearings for the next little while. There was a handful of guys who were supposed to go between July 24th and July 28th, and after the Kraken signed Dunn, all those guys that were scheduled to go in that time frame have now been settled. They've all signed new deals with their current team. So we only have 8 possible arbitration cases left, and the next earliest date for a possible arbitration case will be July 30th. Now, the next possible arbitration dates will be Jeremy Swayman from the Boston Bruins and Jack McBain from the Arizona Coyotes, both on July 30th. That's when those two are next scheduled for an arbitration hearing. So that's the next earliest one. So we're going to have to wait quite a while. I know it's already July 22nd, so it's going to be over a week before we have our next possible arbitration hearing. But those are going to be two interesting ones. McBain in Arizona, I think, might get settled ahead of time, but the Bruins don't have much cap space, and Swayman should value himself pretty high. So I would not be shocked if Swayman went into get an arbitration case, but it's going to be interesting to see. The other arbitration hearings that have still not been settled yet, on August 1st, we're supposed to have an arbitration hearing between the Boston Bruins and Trent Frederick. On August 2nd, we're supposed to have an arbitration hearing between the Anaheim Ducks and the forward Troy Terry. And on August 4th, we're supposed to have an arbitration hearing between the Rangers and forward Braden Scallon, the Penguins and forward Drew O'Connor, the Oilers and forward Ryan McLeod, and the Wild and goalie Philip Gustafsson. So there's going to be some more arbitration hearings. It's just the fact that with all of these guys who have now signed, we're not going to have any over the next week. So interesting stuff. Some more notes to touch on after the Samsonov, Kurashev, and Dunn deals. All 3 teams are going to have a buyout window. Now for the Kraken, that buyout window will begin Monday evening and will last until Wednesday evening, so they're going to have a couple of days before, but I think there's a possibility of a buyout. Now, I know that there's a guy like Chris Driedger who a lot of people think would most likely be moved in the not-too-distant future, but his cap is $3.6 million, and just like Grzelcyk in Boston, like Dillon in Winnipeg, just like Gaudreau in New York are, they have too low of a cap hit to be bought out, as the requirements for the second buyout window is they have to have over a $4 million cap hit, and Driedger has a $3.6 million cap hit, so he's not buyout eligible, which is a little bit sad because I think the Kraken are still trying to clear him off the books. But on top of that, there's definitely some other interesting things that they could do. They're not buying out Dunn, who they just signed. Grubauer still a starting goaltender. Burakovsky, Eberle, Schwartz, Bjorkstrand, Gord, McCann, all really big pieces of that forward group. Oleksiak and Larson are solid top 4 defensemen, so I don't expect any of those guys to be bought out. The one guy I think there's a shot to be bought out would be Alex Wennberg. Wennberg is a solid centerman. He's definitely worked well as like a third, fourth line center over the past couple of years. But with Wright coming in this year, they signed Bill Maher. I just don't really see a fit for Wennberg besides maybe spending a lot of time on the fourth line as fourth line center. So as much as Wennberg's a really good player, I would definitely not be surprised if he was bought out at some point. Wennberg makes a $4.5 million cap hit for this next year before his UFA, so if they were to buy him out, they would save $3.33 million in cap space for this upcoming season, and then have a $1.6 million buyout penalty. So it would not be too much of a buyout penalty for next year, and it would give them $3.33 million extra in cap space. And with the Kraken, after the Dunn deal, now having about less than $1 million for their opening night roster in cap space, I think they could definitely use a little bit more cap space, especially if they were to try and still upgrade that blue line. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we heard Wennberg was bought out in the not-too-distant future. But if we don't hear that Wennberg's bought out, I don't really expect any of the other guys to, so I wouldn't be too shocked if the Kraken didn't buy out anyone. But if they were to, I think Wennberg would be the lone guy who they possibly bought out. Now, as for the other 2 teams, I think the buyout window happens after the arbitration hearing contract has been announced. It might also be after the arbitration hearing. I'm not exactly sure. But if it was to be after the contract would be announced, it'll probably have to be around Tuesday morning, would be my guess, would be the start of the buyout window for the Hawks, and it'll go to Thursday morning. Like I said, they don't have a whole bunch of buyout options. Seth Jones isn't being bought out. They just acquired Taylor Hall. Murphy's a pretty good defenseman, and they just announced Theo, Foligno, and Perry. So most likely not buying out any of those guys. The two guys I think have the most opportunity to be bought out would be Tyler Johnson and Nikita Zaitsev. Both have 1 year left. Johnson has a $5 million cap hit. Zaitsev has a $4.5 million cap hit. If the Hawks were to buy out Johnson, they'd save $3.1 million for this year and have a $1.5 million cap penalty for next year. So not an overly bad contract for them. They get a lot of cap savings for this upcoming season. If they were to buy out Zaitsev, they'd save $1.6 million this year and have an $833,000 cap penalty for next year. So once again, not overly bad, but I do think there is a possibility that we could see a possible buyout from the Hawks. I wouldn't be too shocked if we didn't, given the fact that they are one of the teams who has the most cap space, which is why I think they're easily going to sign Kurashev's deal. But I think there is a slight chance that they could use a buyout window on one of these guys. So, going to be interesting to see. But I wouldn't be shocked if one of these guys was bought out by the Chicago Blackhawks. And on top of those guys, we'll have the Maple Leafs. Most likely they'll have a buyout that starts Wednesday morning and goes to Friday morning next week. So that could be their buyout window. Now, they're not buying out any of their core four. They're also not buying out Morgan Riley. They're not buying out Bertuzzi or Klingberg, who they just signed. They're also not buying out Jake McCabe, who was a really good addition at the end of the season. So there are really only two options here for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, they could buy out Matt Murray. Once again, there's been a lot of questions over the past couple of days about Murray's health, as if he's not healthy, he won't be able to be bought out. But I think there's a slight chance that if he is healthy, he's going to be bought out. A buyout would actually help both the Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators. The Senators are retaining $1.5 million on Murray's contract right now. So if the Maple Leafs were to buy him out, it would save the Maple Leafs $4 million for this year. Plus, it would save the Senators $1.3 million for this year, and would then leave them with a cap penalty of $2 million for the Leafs next year and $666,000 for the Sens next year. So it wouldn't be as bad of a cap penalty for the Sens next year as it would for the Leafs, and it would help them both with their cap space. So it would save Ottawa 1.3, and it would save Toronto $4 million. And for those two teams, it would be a really big win for them. But like we said, there's a very likely chance that Murray doesn't get bought out because he's injured, and he stays in the long-term injury reserve for the rest of the season. So going to be interesting to see about that. But another option here that they could go to, I don't think it's a liked option, but another possible option they could use for a buyout, which I could see if they really do need some cap space, would be TJ Brodie. Brodie's a solid top four defenseman for the Leafs, so that's why I say it's very unlikely that he does. But the cap hits would actually be quite substantial for them. I mean, they're a team right up against the cap. They buy out Brodie. They get the entire $5 million of Brodie's cap hit off the books for this year. They do have a $2.5 million cap penalty for next year, but they will be able to get the entire $5 million off their cap. So that'd be really interesting to see. Like I said, Brodie's a solid top four defenseman. He fits in really well in Toronto. I don't think the Leafs want to buy him out, but I do think there's a possibility that they do buy him out if they need the cap space. And if Murray's not going to be bought out, maybe they try and buy out Brodie with the possibility of getting all of his $5 million off their books for this upcoming season. So going to be interesting to see, but we're about to have buyout windows for the Jets and the Golden Knights later today. And then over the next couple of days, we'll definitely have buyout windows for the Maple Leafs, for the Blackhawks, and for the Kraken. So definitely interesting to see, and I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments on these arbitration cases. Do you think any team gets bought out? And what do you think Kurashev and Samsonov's arbitration deals will wind up being? And lastly, here we go over to the trade rumor. Now, before we get over to the trade rumor part of the video, I would think that there's a couple of things here on the NHL free agent market and trade market that are holding up basically all of the NHL's business. So one, Erik Karlsson. The Karlsson trade is much speculated to be happening at some point this offseason. It hasn't happened yet, and I think it's sort of one of the things that are holding up business this offseason. We know that the Sharks are a team who is looking to sell a lot of pieces this year. There's been a lot of talk about Logan Couture possibly being moved. There's also been talk about Kevin LeBanc possibly being moved. There's also been talk about maybe a different guy being moved, like maybe a Barabanov or maybe a Lindholm or something else. There was a lot of talk that the Sharks can make a lot of moves, but they're focusing on the Erik Karlsson contract right now, trying to move that, and that's really complicating what the Sharks can do elsewhere for the time being. So I think Karlsson moving is halting Sharks from doing business. It's also halting the two teams who are trying to acquire him from doing business. We know the Penguins could be looking to do some other things as well. We know they don't like the Petry contract, so they're trying to move him in maybe a Sharks trade or somewhere else. But if they don't get Karlsson, I could definitely see Petry staying. So a Petry trade is possibly being held up by Karlsson. Also, maybe a Granlund trade as well, as they do need some cap space. On top of those two, if you look at Carolina, they have a ton of business going on right now. They're trying to sign Sebastian Aho. They're trying to possibly sign D'Angelo and Tarasenko to new deals with their team. They're possibly looking at moving Pesce or Teravainen. So they have a lot of things going on right now, and it seems like they've put all of that business on the back burner right now to try and acquire Erik Karlsson, which I think is holding up a ton of other things as well. So Karlsson trade holding up the market as well. Boston's decisions for Krejci and Bergeron. Now, it sounds most likely like both those guys will retire, but the Bruins are still holding out for the possibility that at least one, if not both of them, wind up returning for one more season. Now, if both of them came out from now and said they're both retiring, I would expect the Boston Bruins to try their best to try and find a replacement center, to try and help them get a better 1-2 punch, as I think a punch of a new top-line center in Zacha would be better than a 1-2 punch on the center group of Zacha and Coyle. So that would be interesting to see. As I think the Bergeron and Krejci decisions, as much as they're most likely been made up already, also holding up a deal for the Boston Bruins to possibly go out and get a center, as well as the Bruins arbitration cases are also holding up that stuff too. On top of those ones, you got the Calgary Flames' Elias Lindholm. There's a lot of talk out there that the Flames have not been looking to move at the time being Hanifin or Backlund or any of those guys yet, because they want to figure out what's happening with Lindholm first. Lindholm has not said that he will not extend long term yet. So there is a very likely chance that the Calgary Flames would like to figure out Lindholm first and then move the other ones. But Lindholm hasn't decided yet. So once again, as soon as Lindholm's done, he could be possibly dealt. He could either sign his extension, and then we'll see a trickle-down effect of possible Backlund-Hanifin trade. So Lindholm's holding up the market. On top of those ones, Tarasenko on the free agent market. There's between 6 and 10 really good forward free agents that are still left out there. And I think as soon as the Tarasenko domino falls, some of these other guys will fall, like Tatar, Pius Suter, Max Comtois, some of the other guys as well. So I think Tarasenko signing is also holding up some of the things on the free agent market. And then also William Nylander. I mean, Nylander's contract negotiations are not doing well right now with Toronto. And if they wind up not being able to bridge the $1.5 million gap between the $8.5 that the Leafs are looking for and the $10 million that the Nylander is looking for, there's a significant chance that the Maple Leafs do wind up trading Nylander at some point before the season starts. So if there's a chance that a team could get Nylander, who's a solid top 6 winger, I think there would be some teams who are looking to keep their options open to possibly look for Nylander. And if the Leafs come to terms with Nylander and he's not on the market anymore, maybe some of those teams look to a team like Montreal or Vancouver, who have an overabundance of wingers, to try and help round out their teams in that way. So I think there's definitely some options out there, and I still think we're going to see a ton of moves, especially before training camp or the season starts. But I do think that the Elias Lindholm decision, the Boston Bruins possibly waiting for Krejci and Bergeron, the Karlsson trade, the Tarasenko signing, and Nylander's contract negotiations are all things that are currently holding up the market right now. And I think once we get some of these things done, the market will start to flow a little bit better and we'll see some more trades and signings. Now, going over to the trade rumor part of the video, first we want to talk about Erik Karlsson today. There's been a ton of talk about Karlsson going to the Pittsburgh Penguins over the past couple of days. Talking about Karlsson to the Penguins, there's been a lot of talk that ever since Dubas wanted to get into the president of Hockey Ops role, he's been looking at Karlsson to try and bring him in. It sounds like Dubas really wants Karlsson to be a part of the Pittsburgh Penguins franchise. It also sounds like some of the Penguins core and Crosby and Letang really endorse a move of Karlsson. They would really love to have him. And Letang has even gone as far as to say that he would be willing to shed his quarterback power play role on power play 1 to Karlsson if that would help him come here. So it sounds like even though Letang's probably still their top defenseman, he'd be willing to let Karlsson quarterback power play 1 if the he went to the Penguins. I think, just given the basis of what it looks like, I think the Penguins will be the team to land him. Once again, Carolina is a really good team. They could probably offer San Jose a pretty good package. But on top of those two things, Karlsson and Burns did not work well together in San Jose. I don't think they would work well together in Carolina, so I still think Pittsburgh's a likely team. Now, some of the problems that I've been running into here is it doesn't sound like Petry really wants to go to San Jose, and he does have a modified no trade clause, so he could block a trade to San Jose. So if he's not willing to go to San Jose, there is a likely chance that they would have to either get a third team to possibly take him on, or they would have to buy him out. A buyout for Petry would save them $3.25 million in cap space for this upcoming season. So it would be a possible option for the Penguins, but I think they would love to get his full cap hit off the books. So if they could either put Petry onto another team in maybe a 3-team trade for Karlsson or in a separate trade, I think they would like to do that. But it sounds like he doesn't want to go to San Jose and doesn't want to go that far west. So it sounds like the Penguins are trying to work on something to get Petry off their books, as getting Petry off their books would be a huge step forward in getting Karlsson. Granlund doesn't have any protection. There's been a lot of talk about them possibly buying one of Petry or Granlund, so maybe they move Granlund as a part of a package for Karlsson. They buy out Petry. That saves them $8.25 million in cap space right there. So I think that would be close to enough to maybe make a deal work. It sounds like the San Jose Sharks really like Marcus Peterson on the defensive end, but up to this point, the Penguins have been very reluctant to possibly consider moving him. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it definitely sounds like the Pittsburgh Penguins are the front runners right now for Karlsson, and it sounds like they could definitely have some sort of a deal really close. But it sounds like Petry doesn't want to go to San Jose, so he's either going to be bought out or moved to another team, possibly a third team. It sounds like the Penguins really need someone else to retain some money on Karlsson. So I definitely think whether it be like a team like Chicago or Anaheim or Arizona or some team like this, maybe Philadelphia, I definitely think there's a very likely chance that there's a third team in there who retains maybe $1.5, $2 million on the Karlsson contract to sort of facilitate that trade. But it's also been really hard because Karlsson does have 4 years left, and to get a team to eat between $1 and $2 million on a Karlsson contract for the next 4 years would be a pretty difficult thing to do. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it sounds like there has to be a third team involved to possibly take on Karlsson's contract on top of possibly maybe getting a guy like Jeff Petry. So it sounds like Petry possibly getting moved, Granlund possibly getting moved. It sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces for the Penguins. But I think if the Penguins can get the new deal for Drew O'Connor, open up their buyout window, buy out one of Granlund or Petry, move the other one possibly in a Sharks trade, maybe to a third team, and then use that newfound cap space to go after Karlsson, I think they will be able to do that. So, going to be interesting to see, but it sounds like the Penguins core supports a possible trade for Karlsson. It sounds like Dubas really wanted Karlsson as soon as he became the president of hockey ops for the Penguins. It sounds like Karlsson would, be okay for a trade to Pittsburgh, and it sounds like there's just some speed bumps in the road they have to work through with Petry and Granlund and the Penguins freeing up cap space and having a third team eat some of Karlsson's contract. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I definitely do think that Penguins are the likely team to land Karlsson. On top of those moves, we've also got a couple of goalie rumors here to talk about. Not too much, but I just wanted to update the three main goalies that are on the trade market right now in Hellebuyck, Gibson, and Vladar. Now, on a recent NHL Network hit, Elliot Friedman said that a source told him that would not be surprised if Hellebuyck was not moved before the start of the season. Now, we know that Hellebuyck was a hot commodity right around the draft and free agency, but he was never moved. He's looking for a $9.5 million cap hit. No team was looking to give up a trade package that the Winnipeg Jets wanted if they were not going to get Hellebuyck on a long-term extension. And that long-term extension was going to be expensive and made a lot of teams wary. So that's why the Kings went out and got Talbot. That's why the Senators went out and got Korpisalo. That's why the Penguins went back to Jari. And that's why there's not too many options now for Hellebuyck. The one team that keeps on coming up is Jersey. I think they could pull off a trade with New Jersey. I'm not sure if Jersey would be able to extend him, but they would definitely be able to pull off a deal with Jersey. Jersey has a solid prospect pipeline. They could give up a defensive prospect or a forward prospect or maybe even a goalie prospect with guys like Brennan or Dawes. They could give Vanacek to Winnipeg, who could still help the team be competitive for the next couple of years. And I think that would be a pretty decent trade package, maybe a first-round pick. And I think the Winnipeg Jets will be interested, but I'm not sure that the New Jersey Devils would be overly thrilled with a $9.5 million cap hit for Connor Hellebuyck over the next couple of years. So unless things change on that, I think Jersey and Buffalo are really the only two teams in on Hellebuyck right now, and I don't think either of those two young teams would really want to pay Hellebuyck, who's already 30 years old, $9.5 million. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I think what Freeman said is very likely, and we don't see a Hellebuyck trade before the season. Maybe we see one closer to the trade deadline. As for Gibson, there's still a lot of talk that he could be dealt. I think with his contract security and being signed for the next couple of years, there's maybe a little bit more of a likely chance that he's moved, given that he's only got a $6.4 million cap hit for the next couple of seasons. So I think it's a little bit more likely that he gets moved. Now, I think Buffalo could maybe be a team that fits in there. Maybe Jersey. I could also see a couple of other teams, like maybe in Edmonton. If Edmonton were to move Campbell, maybe another young player, draft pick, I think that could really pry Gibson from Anaheim. If the Sabres were to move Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, maybe a draft pick and a decent young player, I think that would be enough to get Gibson. If the Devils were to move Vanacek, a decent prospect and a pick, I think that would be enough to pry him from Anaheim. So I'm not saying that Gibson won't be traded before the start of the season. I think Gibson is more likely to be dealt than Hellebuyck, just given his contract security for the next couple of years before the season starts. But it also wouldn't to shock me if Gibson went start the season in a tandem in Anaheim with Dostal. So going to be interesting to see, but definitely I would not be surprised if Gibson was not moved over the next little while. Vladar is the other big goalie option that is still being kicked around at this point in time. The Flames have three good goaltenders: Markstrom, Wolf, and Vladar. Wolf is going to definitely be the backup this year. Markstrom has no movement clause, even though there were some rumors around him. It seems like he's going to stay put. So they still have Vladar. I know there was some talk early in the season that they would be okay with running with three goalies on their team. I don't think so. I think it would be best and most likely all of the team and the players' interest to make a move at some point. Some teams I could see have interest in Vladar. If the Ducks do trade Gibson before the season starts and they aren't able to get a goalie back, maybe they try and get Vladar from Calgary. Vladar is a solid goaltender, and he could definitely be in a really good tandem goalie with Dostal. And the Ducks could maybe move a guy like Henrique or Silverberg, who have a year left on a contract, and maybe like a third or fourth round pick to Calgary to obtain Vladar. I think that would work. I continue to look at the Vancouver Canucks. I think they could use a solid 1B goalie while Silovs continues to develop in the AHL. I think they can move a Garland and the third round pick. I think that could be a possible option. Columbus Blue Jackets are another team I think comes up. They have a good goalie in Tarasov, who I think could be the backup this year. But they could try and have Tarasov in the minors again this upcoming season. So maybe they try and go and get out 1B goalie to work in a tandem with Merzlikins. So maybe the Jackets move like a Bolkvist or a Peak or a Roslovic or something, because they do have a really deep forward and defensive group. So I would not be shocked if they maybe moved one of those overabundance of players and a draft pick, like maybe a third or fourth round pick to get Vladar. So yeah, Ducks, Jackets, Canucks, some of the teams I think could be interested in Vladar. I also wouldn't be shocked if a team like the Hawks were interested in Vladar. I also wouldn't be shocked if a team like Tampa had some interest in Vladar, but they would definitely not have the cap space to make it work. So I think there's definitely going to be some interest in Vladar. If Buffalo's not able to get a guy like Gibson or Hellebuyck before the start of the season, maybe they try and go after a guy like Vladar. Maybe they make like a Vladar for Comrie and a pick trade, something like that. I think that could be also work for the Calgary Flames as well, as Comrie is a good third goalie. So I definitely think there's some options here, but I would not be shocked if Vladar was moved before the start of the season. So definitely going to be interesting to see. A lot to hear your thoughts down in the comments, as that's all I'm going to talk about for today. What do you think about Karlsson? Does he indeed get dealt to Pittsburgh? Do they have to get a third team involved to retain money? Does Petry get dealt? Does Petry get bought out? What about Granlund? Does he get dealt in a package to San Jose? Does he go to a third team? Definitely love to hear your thoughts down in the comments on what sort of trade package you would think the Pittsburgh Penguins have to give up for Karlsson, and what sort of a trade do you think they would have to make. And also leave a comment down below on what you think about the goalie rumors. Does Hellebuyck get dealt before the start of the season? Does Gibson get dealt before the start of the season? Does Vladar get dealt before the start of the season? And if so, where do any of these goalies go? Definitely love to hear your thoughts on all that was discussed in today's video down in the comments. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. We really have over 100 subscribers now. Thank you for all of your support. So definitely, if you haven't, don't forget to subscribe. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so definitely check that out. I'll leave links down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.